I am a management faculty member at University of Washington, Tacoma. The work that I have done theoretically is around organizations as communication process. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, some of the assumptions that have brought me to that, some of the things that I have observed as a practitioner that drove me to actually look at that. And let me start with some assumptions and some things that I saw in the field as I worked with management teams and managers and listened to their conversations, how they viewed organizations, and how that bothered me, and drove me to start doing some research to take a look and see if there's different ways to take a look at these things. It was really common for me to hear managers say such things as, this employee is not motivated. This employee can't perform. There's something wrong with this employee. And I would consider that a little bit and say, so you're telling me your behavior has nothing to do with this, correct? And they'd say, no, it's all the employee's fault. So I began to think about that and say, I don't think that's the case. What I think is that the employee and the manager co-create the reality, because two different people put together are going to have a completely different reality. So that began to beg the question, what is the theory behind this and what does that look like? And I began to decide I had to go back to school, which I did. I just finished my doctorate last year. I'm kind of a late bloomer. So 40 years of my experience as a practitioner, now I actually teach strategic management, which has nothing to do with what we're talking about. So as I began to take a look at the theories and the assumptions behind my work, I began to look at second order cybernetics as one of those. I certainly am a constructionist, not constructivist, but I'm a constructionist. I really do not believe in objectivity. I think we co-create the environments that we research, so I don't really think we have truly objective research environments. I became very interested in process organization theory, PROS, and I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's really a theory about organization that talks about everything is in a state of becoming. So temporality really becomes an issue. So if you're in an organization, let me ask you about your organization. Think a second, if you have an organization, think about your organization and how do you describe that organization? Just think about that a second. How would you describe your organization? So let me hear a couple ideas. How do you describe your organization? What is it and how do you describe it? Yeah.
Reluctantly hierarchical.
Reluctantly hierarchical. Excellent. How else might somebody explain or describe their organization? Yes?
Collectively hierarchical.
Collectively hierarchical. Excellent. Fragmented. What other terminology? Yes?
Managerially incompetent.
Yes, I understand this concept.
Distributed leadership.
Distributed leadership. Excellent.
Stratified notes connected by an inflexible core.
Yeah, interesting.
Correct, but weak.
Okay.
Single practitioner with good network.
Yeah, that would be you. Very nice. So, how did it become that?
Through a historical process that didn't have any knowledge of its history, in that it took place over time,
Yeah.
and immediate short-term decisions without a holistic view.
So, do you believe that firms are enacted to be what they are? Initially or over time? Over time. Temporality tends to be the issue. So if you're in the business community, which you may or may not be, and you think about organization theory, there's tons written about organization theory. The most current is organizations are living systems, right? That's one of the predominant theories in the market. And what's the problem with that? if we have autopoietic living systems, what's wrong with that metaphor?
Nothing.
Nothing. So tell me about nothing.
There's nothing wrong with it. It's perfectly accurate.
Is it?
Yes, in what way is it not?
Can they replicate themselves?
So of course they can. They're not autopoietic systems. I didn't claim that. That's a step too far.
Okay.
But they're certainly alive. They're alive based on the conversations they're capable of having.
So we'll talk about that in a second. Yes.
I would say they're not autopoietic. I don't think there is such a thing as social autopoiesis as it was defined as a concept. There's structural coupling between organizations and those involved in it, but it'd have to be something else for me. I don't think it's maybe allopoietic, but I'm longing for a third. I don't think they're autopoietic. I don't think they're necessarily allopoietic. And I'd love to know something about an organization that's made up of a variety of autopoietic systems in a system.
Therein was my angst. I had the same issue. So thinking about autopoietic, one of the theorists I studied extensively was Luhmann, and you probably know just exactly how Maturana thought about Luhmann's theories of autopoiesis, right?
I know how I thought about it.
Right. So the difference is Luhmann didn't take autopoiesis and try to create a model around it. He used it to inform his theories of self-organizing systems connected through conversation. So when I started developing the concept for me, and that's not new, lots of people have talked about this, as organizations a communication process, it was really to begin to understand and try to have a different model than these entities that people describe as organizations. If you're looking at process organization theory, everything is in this state of becoming. The only difference is temporality, right? So if we have a conversation, its life is very quick. If you have a chair, the life is longer. It is still in a state of becoming. We may see it as reality and a set entity, and it's just a temporality conversation. Over 2,000 years, that thing's not going to look the same way because it continuously changes. So we see entities as permanent in construction. If you're looking at process organization theory, we try to deconstruct that a little bit more and understand it's still in the state of becoming. So the problem I saw was that people viewed organizations as entities that were, here it is. Here is the organization. This is what we've got. Here's what the organization does. And by the way, the organization doesn't do anything. The humans do. Right? But we talk about the organization as this entity without understanding that the humans co-create that on a ever-revolving process. And we talked about the whole concept of, oh my gosh, I just lost the word. Well, we'll come back to it. It'll pop up, yes. So one of the things that I've done is change my conversation in organizations based on my understanding of how we co-create the organization, and that is co-created continuously through every conversation in the organization. A lot of the belief is we directively create and enact the organization. We plan it, we create it, it's created based out of what we do. It's always what we're supposed to have happen that really doesn't happen. For instance, cultures, we define the culture, and then we go out and tell everybody what the culture is, and voila, that's the culture, right?
No.
And so what, yeah, you're absolutely correct. So why? Why is, just because the executive team designs and says, here's the culture, rolls it out, communicates it to it, right? In conversation, to communicate it. Here's our culture. Why isn't that the culture?
Well, it's what they believe is the culture.
Well, they may believe it, yeah, because that's their mental model, right?
They want it to be.
They want it to be, but it isn't, so why not?
Because culture is made up of other variables.
Like humans?
Yes, but not only humans.
Not only humans? Well,
It's not just communication.
no, it's not just communication, right? So we do a lot of the work, and we talked about this a little bit before. Organizations have lots of communication. I go into organizations, I can tell you virtually every single one's going to say, if I ask them, what's your biggest problem? We have a communication problem. They all say that. We have a communication problem. So we have financial statements, we have marketing statements, we have directives, we have emails, we have blogs, God knows what we have. We have tons of communication. So what's lacking in an organization if it isn't communication? Conversations. We're not having conversations.
Got that right.
And what enacts the organization and creates the culture is every conversation, those folks in conversation co-create that culture. You can influence it by being a member of that conversation and injecting your thoughts, feelings, etc. into the conversation, but it can't be top-down dictated. So the organization actually is enacted through conversations throughout the organization. Yes?
So, in your model, is there any representation of differential access to co-creation,
Tell me a little bit about what you're asking.
AKA power and reward structure?
Power and reward structures are huge. Absolutely. If you have a human system, there's power issues, always. So it doesn't mean that somebody with more power can't have more influence, but it doesn't mean that those people with less power have no influence, right?
Yeah.
So knowing that there is a power differential, I think, is critical. Maybe creating and designing, we get to the design concept of creating containers for conversations that diminish the power differentials can help enlighten some of the executive management that maybe it isn't all about them. Yeah, I say not so facetiously to groups, because most of them are this. Given a diverse and complex world, how well do you think a group of old white guys can relate well to the world around them? If they're not in continuous conversation with both vertically and horizontally, inside and outside the organization, right? So we need to be in conversation. And the more that we're in conversation, the more relevant and sustainable our organization becomes.
Potential.
Potentially, yeah, there's other market forces. This is a generality. Obviously, it is far more complex than I'm painting it. Being a strategic management guy, if you don't do that well, you can have all the conversations you want. You're probably not going to strategically position yourself in the market. You'd probably fail anyway. But part of that is being in conversation so that you actually have more points of view. One of the things I spent a lot of time doing was working on multi-generational dialogue. And what's really interesting about that, to me, is that you go into organizations and they all said, we have a millennial problem. Millennials don't do what we want them to do. Millennials don't listen to us. Millennials have no work ethic. Millennials feel entitled. Oh my God, the litany of things that millennials do. Not that any time any of us were young, right? You don't remember yourselves ever being that way, do you? Yeah, never. So I come indoors and I say, hey, that's bullshit. That just doesn't exist. So what I have found is that people want to be treated with respect, have a voice, be listened to. That's true all the time. And that goes for those in my generation and the generations coming up. Social innovation is always coming up with a generation emerging. So why do we get in the way? Let's create conversation, invite them into the conversation, have them be part of co-creating our organization. And what emerges is a new reality. Is it my way or is it their way? No, it's our way. It's a different way of looking at things. Yeah.
Having attempted to have a number of these similar conversations with organizations,
Yes.
it's interesting how many things have to be undone in terms of concept. to make room for the idea that there's an importance for conversation.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, just starting with the mindset that people don't like thinking about the fragility of an organization, to say to them, this organization does not exist but for what happens when we show up again tomorrow morning.
That's one of the things I said too. Yeah,
We
absolutely.
only recreate it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, when we stop interacting in the ways that we do, the organization disappears. There's
Absolutely.
nothing else that really causes it to perpetuate and to continue.
Yeah.
People who run organizations don't like thinking that. People who invest in organizations don't like thinking that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of engineers who inhabit organizations around the world, and they traditionally haven't thought that way.
Right.
You know, they think about planning and implementing, and then moving towards stability that people don't have to worry about anymore. Undoing that thinking is enormous.
And it's really about mindset and mental models, right? So we spend billions of dollars on training and development all around changing behavior. But if we don't get to the mental models and the mindsets that precede that, it's not sustainable. Yeah, at least in my view.
I like what you say. I don't like that you make it sound easy. Because it is not at all.
It is not
And
easy.
one of the keywords that you have not mentioned yet is variety.
Mhm.
When we're talking about the number of people that are typically involved in organizations, just pick a number, let's say it's 15 to 20, 30, whatever.
Right.
In that size of a population, I guarantee you statistically, there are one or two people I cannot have a conversation with, just as a matter of one-on-one variety. And let alone the question of absorbing the variety of 25 people.
Mhm. Right.
On top of that, what happens when I'm in the middle management position and I'm trying to do justice to that ideal, but upwards there's still a hierarchy.
Absolutely.
From that moment on, I lose sleep.
I
And it's
agree.
not easy.
No, you're absolutely correct. So it's not by accident that I would advocate that your leadership creates the context for people to co-create towards an organization. So they can shut down conversations, they can attack you if you make a mistake. I mean, they have all sorts of exciting behaviors that you're well aware of. Or if you step outside the norm, good luck with that. You know, I grew up dyslexic, so being outside the norm is not an exciting thing. I grew up being told I was broken my whole life. So that changes how you interface with the world and who you're willing to have conversations with. There's people out there you want to talk to. Now, they will talk to somebody. Not everybody's going to sustain within an organization if it starts emerging in a more inclusive manner. There's going to be people that leave, which is probably fine to attract others potentially.
Do you think it's possible these conversations could develop something like what Talib calls anti-fragility? Which is systems that get more robust, the more kinds and the more quantity of perturbations they encounter?
Well, I think what I would say is, I use the word sustainability of the organization, how well it will weather the complexity that's swirling around it. And, you know, if we look at the old models I grew up, we used to make 10, 20-year plans, seriously. So I would think of that reality. But the reality is, things change dynamically all the time. And if you have a very narrow set of conversations, you really can't get enough information and intelligence to be able to adapt to that well. That's how I would say sustainability. Yeah.
Now, being an engineer who has been embedded in business organizations for the last 50 years, I would like to comment that there's a couple of things I'm not hearing that you should be talking about. One is that organizations are goal-oriented.
Yep.
The top guys say,
Absolutely.
here's what we're going to do, and then along the chain of command are all the methodologies that are applied to achieve those goals in detail. So, and if you want to hear more about what my experiences have been in doing this, come to our session at 6 o'clock. I'll tell you more. But you've got to talk in terms of goals, and you got to talk in terms of methodologies.
I would agree.
And you do that by carrying out conversations, I certainly agree with that. But you gotta have goals and you gotta have methodologies, otherwise it isn't an organization.
I would agree. When we come together, we humans organize. We come together, we have some sort of idea. We either organize into families, social organizations, faith organizations, education organizations, war organizations, whatever. We organize to do stuff. We organize to do work. That's what we do. One way or another, we're organizing to do that. We bring our values, our norms, our visions, our beliefs to that, and that's what creates the core of the original organization. That can change as leadership changes, as you well know, and we've seen that with the Hewlett Packards of the world, et cetera. Leadership changes made a huge difference in how those are run. So I would absolutely agree with you on that. What I would say is that if we understand, and there's two pieces to the answer. Most of us are educated in work systems, particularly in business schools. That's really all we talk about is work systems. But human systems operate differently than work systems. But we don't talk about human systems in the work world. So what we end up doing is we take something that you can design, predict, measure, organize, etc., and we take that work system and we impose it on the humans. And then we wonder why the humans are unmotivated. And if we understand both, you can create systems to really engage your humans to do the work better. So I agree, you gotta have the goals, we have to focus on that, but you gotta have a real good focus on both, I think.
Speaking of temporality, we live in a world, of course, of deadlines. Pressing deadlines, and deadlines obviously mitigate against conversation. So do you have any thoughts about respectful and non-harmful ways to constrain conversation productively, but that doesn't kill it?
So it depends on the purpose of the conversation. I talk about designing a container for the conversation. That container is based on the purpose of the conversation. If you need a deliberative conversation, design the container and the conversation around a deliberative process. If you need a conversation, dialogic process, you need a different container with different questions. So rather than just blindly saying we're going to have a meeting to discuss this, understand that how you design that container is going to make a difference on the type of conversation you're having.
And you develop different heuristics that you use?
Yeah. So I think we're, particularly in business, we're very deliberative. You know, we come together to make decisions. We don't have conversations. We don't have time to talk. We need to get together and have a decision making, right? Yeah, that's what we do. It doesn't take a lot of time to front end that with a emergent type of dialogue to get better information to flow into the deliberation. We're not talking about years here. It can be a couple hours, and that's it.
But now you use the word dialogue as opposed to conversation.
Dialogue is a type of conversation it is, and so the way I frame it, debate, dialogue, deliberation, are all different types of conversational practices. That's the way I define it, and I should define my terms.
Well, when I hear the word conversation, I hear the implication that for both partners or for partners in a conversation, there has to be at least the potential for increased variety. And now there's a contradiction because, as you said, if an organization, by definition, is goal-oriented, and we have conversation throughout the organization, that means that at least potentially the goal is up for renegotiation throughout the organization.
Maybe, maybe not. Or maybe the method to get to the goal is up for negotiation. Okay? So I wouldn't necessarily say the goal's up for negotiation, but maybe through the conversation, those people that actually set the goals may be informed to change those goals based on what they're hearing. If they're insulated and they don't have that information coming to them from a variety of perspectives, their goals may not be as realistic and effective as they possibly be. That would be the way I'd look at it.
So say you have an organization open to conversation. In your experience, how do they deal with the conflict that emerges through those conversations?
Well, it's part of it's not agreement, because to assume everybody has to agree is a big problem. You don't have to all agree. But you need some processes to allow people to work through their disagreements. So there's a ton of different techniques to do that.
Anyone in particular that you're more comfortable or?
Well, I tend to be a dialogue guy, so it's something for me is I'll say, well, tell me about how that feels. You know, what are you
But not a
hearing?
particular structure.
Yeah.
Like I'm in the consensus model as
Oh,
a
okay.
way
Yeah.
of embracing conflict. I'm wondering if you've had any experience with that in your use of conversation.
I have not used consensus very often. I tend to be kind of a non-consensus kind of guy. So at some point we have an agreement to move forward, and if there's disagreement, we agree when we move out of the room to fall behind it. So, yeah.
Many people, so Stafford Beer, in the early 1970s, worked very hard to develop a system of conversation between different levels of hierarchies in Chile. Is this kind of development of conversation between hierarchies, do you see that being implemented? Or do you see that as being important, as well as conversations that might happen at the same levels?
I see it extremely important. I'd say both horizontally and vertically, both inside and outside the organization, it's critical. And one of the things that I have envisioned for developing emerging leaders is multi-generational dialogue and bringing young professionals into higher level conversations so they understand the organization, and those people, my generation or whatever, are beginning to learn and draw in that wisdom into the decision-making process. And I think we too often isolate that. You haven't paid your dues, you haven't been here long enough, that's not your role. I think all those types of conversations jeopardize the sustainability of the organization, in my opinion. So that's my opinion. Yeah.
What do you think? Going back to Thomas's point about tools, people like Robert Rosenfeld talk about incorporating a knowledge of the innovation cycle, moving from revolution to stagnation, back to revolution in various ways. And that involves sort of internalizing more variety as an organizational goal. Mm-hmm. And figuring out a way so that your idea people don't go cuckoo in terms of implementation, and the implementation people don't go cuckoo in terms of revolutionary paradigm change and disruption. Does that fit with your conversation model?
Well, I guess from my perspective, what I'd say is I assume every individual, both inside and outside, potentially has wisdom to lend to the conversation. It may not be the direction I want to go, but I might learn and change my conversation, my direction based on that conversation. And when things change so quickly around us, we can't think of things as fixed. And an entity, we need to think of things as in a process of becoming on a regular basis, and we need inputs to help us co-create that entity as it emerges. And we just don't know what it's going to look like necessarily.
I'm trying to clarify my question.
Okay.
I'll try.
You can clarify verbally. That's works with me.
I understand that the first thing that a worker does when they clock on is that they produce themselves as a worker. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to figure out this goal-orientated, this purposeful system.
Right.
And what strategies have you embraced or discovered, or I'm just interested to enlarge the vocabulary of the self-definition as a worker, as opposed to a member of.
So it gets back, I can't remember who was talking about it, but we were talking about the impact of working under a leader that may or may not support a more inclusive conversation. And that's going to make a difference.
Hardly a leader.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Let's say a manager and not say a leader, because I think you're absolutely appropriate in that.
Probably most organizations.
Which is many organizations, it's one of my pet peeves. So yes, I would agree. So if you have a manager that is a leader and is engaged in conversations with their team, it'll change their perception on what their role is and how they can participate. So if I'm under an autocratic manager that is expert-based, that believes in telling you what to do, has no trust in you, I'm going to tell you, you go do this task, you come back, I'll give you another one, right? Micromanagement is best. If I'm a manager that really trusts and I lead through engaging you in dialogue, encouraging your curiosity, I might start assigning you project and process work and giving you far more freedom to create. The goals may be the same, but how you're getting there is going to be far more expansive than me telling you what to do and how to do it, right? And that comes from a leadership perspective, or a management perspective, depending on what your frame model is. Yeah. So actually wrote a case study with one of my faculty on an intervention we did with a leadership team, at least I did when I was at T-Mobile. And we had a couple warring teams, management teams that wouldn't talk together, and it just completely broken down. I took them through a process of dialogue and then deliberation, and we co-created a new way forward, and they went out and transformed the way they interacted with the site, and it was amazing what the results were. It makes a difference. It makes a difference. The paper?
What's the name of it?
Oh, I can't remember the whole. It was in the 2012 spring edition of OD Practitioner. And it's on Dialogic OD. That happens to be my OD field. So I'll give you links to that in the paper on this work as well. So if you're interested. Thank you.